So we'll start by rolling our quadricep muscles. These are the muscles that that lengthen when we do this and shorten when we do this. You can even take your hand to your thigh if you're in a standing position and feel those muscles moving. Pulling your heel towards your bum, that's a stretch. They're lengthening. Sending the leg forward, you can feel a little firing up of the thigh. That's the tightening. So these are muscles that get tight when we do actions that involve moving our legs. They can be chronically over lengthened if we sit a lot. So really nice muscle that benefits from myofascial rolling. We'll start towards the top. We'll start on the right leg and then do the left. Starting towards the top. So you'll find your hip crease. That's the place where the hip bends. There is one, our rectus femoris, that one quad muscle, runs from over the hip all the way down and then over the knee. So it's also involved in this action, this action, this action. It's getting all of these things going on in the legs. The other three just hang out from between the hip and the knee. We'll start a couple inches down from that hip flexor. You can find that spot. We'll make our way down. I like to take my elbows down to the earth here, and I'm just tucking that tune-up ball in that spot I just identified, my forearms on the ground, both legs long down the mat. Yeah, you can find a seated variation, applying your own pressure using your hands. This is a nice alternative if lying down on the mat feels like a little bit too much pressure. You can also lean against a wall and do this work. I clearly have not a single available wall to demonstrate on in my room, but that's always an option for you, kind of in between those two options of seated using your own hands and being down on the mat using your whole body weight. As always, before we start to move, can we tune into the breath a little bit? Full breath in and sigh it out. Get really heavy through the left leg. And maybe you start to introduce a little side-to-side wiggle of your hips. I'm just rolling towards the left hip and then rolling towards the right hip. If you want a bit more control, you can curl into your left toes, heel up to the ceiling, and float your left knee. As always, I catch myself going really fast. I'm going to try to go 50% slower. Maybe you can too. And then if you like, if you've curled into the back toes and lifted the back knee, can you start to wiggle up and down, maybe just an inch or two? Oh, mama. Notice how that feels. What kind of feedback is arising? Do you tense the jaw? Some folks like to take the opposite leg. So right now I started you guys in the shape, legs long down the mat. Some folks like to pull that opposite leg out for more of a half frog position. So you can play with that. Nice way to stretch the inner thigh of the left leg, or right leg, sorry, ever so gently. Extra backwards directions today. Just gonna have to deal with it. If you are finding that up and down rocking, you might make it a little bigger. Somebody just put a thumbs up on the screen. That's cool. I've got my hands clasped and I'm pushing into my elbows a little bit just to create a bit of lightness in my chest. That's just what feels good in my body. Some people prefer to let their chest just come right down to the mat. I find I have a lot less ability to move there, but that's okay. You might just be hanging out in stillness. Remember, more sensation isn't always better. And then I want you to pause somewhere on this up and down rolling and just relax, just be. Option just to stay, to find that static pressure. Or you might add this pin and stretch motion. Thigh presses down. Gently, gently, slowly, slowly start to float your back shin. So left shin starts to lift. You can do what I'm doing, so playing with this lift and lower of the shin, if that feels okay. If it feels good to hold it up, you might sway the shin side to side. That's getting into that cross fibering action, rolling against the grain that these fascial tissues run in. Fascia, remember, that's our connective tissue. It weaves around muscles, in between the layers of blood vessels, fat cells, all the things. It's just interweaving like a little spider's web around, encasing, and through tons of other connective tissues in the body and other tissues in the body. But fascia doesn't respond to stretching the same way that our muscles do. So that's why myofascial release can be a beautiful complement to something like a yoga practice, because it creates length and space and mobility in our fascial tissues, in our muscle tissues, in a way that we just can't do because of the anatomy of fascia itself. It doesn't connect into bones, so it's harder, or as in the same way that muscle does, skeletal muscle. So it's just harder to stretch or to manipulate in any way. When you're ready, we'll gently start to, if that right leg is out to the side, slide it down. Push your arms into the earth. Come back to your tabletop shape. You can stay on forearms or come up into a tabletop. And I just want you to move at the hips. Hips hinge back like you're coming into child's pose. And then come forward like you're coming into table. And just play with that a few times. Notice how movement feels at the hip joint. Notice how the front of the thigh feels. Does the left leg, or the leg you just rolled, feel a little puffier? Is it giving you a bit more feedback? When you're ready, pull yourself all the way down to your mat. And just notice how the tops of the thighs feel on the ground. Like, did Harvey vomit on my mat or something? There's something scritchy back here. Anyways, just, yeah, you was right. We'll roll towards the left hip and tuck the tune-up ball underneath the right hip, or whatever the opposite side was on the other side. I take full responsibilities for mixing up my lefts and rights all class. 'Tis what it is. This might be an interesting place to practice sort of drawing inward with your senses. So you might close the eyes. Might begin to deepen the breath. And then if you'd like, start to shimmy your hips to the right and then shimmy your hips to the left. Could be really small, doesn't need to be a big motion. A little goes a long way with myofascial release. Do you perceive any big differences side to side? My other leg was a bit more tight, a bit more responsive to this work. This one's feeling okay so far, but that might also change as we start to explore different techniques. Rocking the hips side to side, that's cross fibering, rolling against the grain of the fiber. If you want to play with the next technique, we'll curl into the toes, find a little lift of that back knee, and again, we wiggle up and down. This is called stripping, rolling in the same direction as the fiber. Option to slide that opposite leg out for that half frog position. Remember, if you ever get a sharp sensation of pain, if this feels agonizing, like too agonizing, such that breath is tight and jaw is clenched, you're going a little too hard. Let the motions go and just hang out resting down, or come away from the work entirely. Rolling our quads always feels like a teeny bit of a workout because I have to push my forearms into the earth to support my chest. So know that you can always let the chest melt down, that you do not have to add the rolling. Or if this is feeling really beneficial for you, you might make the motion bigger. Roll a little higher and a little lower. Try to look for a little bit of ease in some of those other muscles. Even like I was clenching my hands really tightly. I'm also, of course, speeding up, so I'm going to try to slow it down. I'll uncross my fingers so that they can just rest down on my mat. And then take a moment to assess. Is there one part of this up and down motion that feels super spicy? You might hang out there again in stillness, or start to find that little bend of the back knee. This feels really intense in my body. I might just do 1 or 2, lifting the shin and letting the shin tap down. Just an option, never a requirement. Notice your breath. Notice how the upper body muscles start to seize up as the motion gets too intense. We ease away from that edge. Yeah, if you want to add that little shimmy left and right, let the shins sway gently. We're adding that cross fibering with just a little bit more pressure. Yeah, nice variations. Let's take one more breath here. And when you're ready, we'll let that leg come down. Palms or forearms pushing down, press yourself back, and we'll meet in that tabletop shape again. Might feel interesting here just to sway your hips out and notice how range of motion at the hip sockets feels, or ease of motion. Switch directions with that if you're playing with those circles. Let's pause back in that tabletop, coming down onto the belly one last time. Might plant your forearms to support your head, and we'll just take a bend into the knees. Can you notice how the front of the thighs presses into the mat? Maybe you let the shins sway left and right. You might still feel little parts that feel quite stiff. For me, when I sway over to the left, I can feel the outside of my left thigh still feels a bit tight, whereas my right thigh feels super loose, super mellowed out. So just observe. Never looking for symmetry, but rather just taking stock on what has changed as a result of the time of the energy you put in. That's as much a part of this practice as all the weird stuff we do moving the props around. Let the legs rest back down. Take a deep breath in and let it go. Nice work.